you can tell, we've put an emphasis on bringing back players, our players from last year that, contributed to our success, and he would be no different. So we'll continue to have talks and see where it goes.
And as far as, the draft, I mean, you do have a lot of players re-signed, 22 starters back, some backups as well. How many rookies do you think would actually have a chance to make this team? And since you have so many roster spots sort of accounted for, would you be more or less inclined to maybe, package picks to move up, move around, do those sort of things, since you may not have as many roster spots open?
That's an exercise. It's all that we'll get into here starting now, since all the evaluations are done.
Right.
It's all going to depend on who is there at each pick, what players are there, if there's an opportunity. I mean, I hate to sound cliche and say we could move up, we can move back,
Sure.
we can stay. But all those options will be on the board just like they are every year. There are opportunities for us to get better in terms of our depth. You never know how these players come in. They could challenge for a starting spot somewhere. So, but we are excited about the fact, like we've talked about this before, that, in a lot of drafts where you have a lot of needs, now we have a lot of wants. And it's exciting to go into a draft like that. Now we do still have some positions and some depth and some areas where we may need help in the future that we're looking into.
Thanks.
We'll go over to Greg Allman.
Hey, Jason, obviously last year was a whole different exercise for you guys in dealing with a draft prep under difficult circumstances. The one thing you did have last year you don't have this time around is the combine. I just want to ask you what kind of things you've done to offset that, and maybe to make sure you had enough of the personal interaction and question time with prospects that you didn't have in Indy this time around.
Yeah, we've done a lot of Zooms where we've got them going on every day. We've got some today. We're splitting up coaches and scouts and talking to as many of these guys as much as we can. So I feel like in terms of just the communication and the interviews, although they're over Zoom, may be a little bit more than what we did last year.
If I asked you a ballpark, how many guys you Zoomed with for this draft, how many might it be?
Oh, I couldn't tell you right now. Just as many as we can on our board. So I would have to go up and look. I quit counting after 50. So last year we were just starting to get used to Zoom, and I remember my first Zoom call. I didn't know how to mute myself and got in a little trouble yelling at my kids for trying to barge into the office. So this year we're a little bit more technically savvy, and I think this is the case with everybody around the league. So the Zooms have become the new norm, and we've gotten a lot out of them.
Thanks, Jason.
Over to Jenna Lane.
Hey, Jason, back to what Rick was asking about earlier with Antonio. I know that when you signed him last year, there was uncertainty because at the time, his civil trial was scheduled for December 2020. That got moved back because of COVID-19. Did the uncertainty with that for 2021 have any impact on, whether or not you guys would be able to sign him? Does it give you more clarity now on possibly getting a new deal done?
Well, it's always good when there is some resolution, but we signed him, like you said, last year with that, with the civil case looming. So all I can go off of is what we saw of Antonio on our team this year. And, he obviously was a good player, but he was a great teammate. So to have this resolved, it certainly helps, but it wasn't, that's not that necessarily the deciding factor of whether or not we're going to continue to talk.
And as far as the draft goes, when we talked to Coach Arians, he spoke about some of the areas he wanted to get better in, being more speed on defense, more help, in both trenches, possibly a developmental quarterback. How do the strengths of this draft kind of play into some of those needs and wants for you guys?
They do. to a degree. There's only so many players in every draft. This year's draft seems to be a little bit more tilted offensively, in my opinion, at least. But there are still, that's not to say that there aren't players at every position that we have targeted throughout the entire draft. So I think, you always have what you want going into the draft. You don't necessarily come out of it with everything that you went in trying to get, because it depends on if the player's there. You can't just, if you need a certain position or you want a certain position, it's not as easy as just picking any player at that position. So it's all just going to kind of depend on who's there on the board. And there's also other ways of finding those players that, like BA talked about and he and I have talked about after the draft too. So your needs and your desires in April are completely different when it comes time for September. So sometimes you take a player that people scratch their head, why would they take him? And then come December or come September or December for that matter, you're glad you took him.
Thank you.
We'll go over to Scott Reynolds.
Hey, Jason, when you've picked in the first round in years past, you've legitimately drafted a first round talent, whether it's been number 1 overall, number 12, et cetera. In probably every year, there aren't 32 guys with an actual first round grade in the draft. So there's a likelihood that you might be selecting a guy with a lesser grade, obviously at number 32. How many players have first round grades on your draft board in this year's draft?
Well, I mean, that's a tough question. It's what is the definition of a first round pick? Sometimes you as in the media have your ideas of what a first round pick is. Sometimes ours are a little bit different. There are not as many high end players as there have been in the past. I don't want to put a particular number on it, but we feel very good where we're at. We feel that there's going to be an option for us, or several options for us at 32 that we're going to feel comfortable with if we stay with the pick.
And speaking of that, that leads to my next question. How much of a benefit is the 5th-year option that comes with the first round pick to you guys? Teams have sought to trade up into the number 32 spot from the second round, but before Lamar Jackson comes to mind with Baltimore. And how much do you have to weigh losing the 5th-year option versus acquiring more picks by trading down into the second round? Can you kind of explain that thought process a little bit and how much you might value the 5th round option?
Yeah, there is some value to it. You need to, first of all, the player needs to be a good player, and a lot of times you don't find out until after a second year. And like I've said here before with you guys, now it seems you need to know by the second game. But there is some value to it. We'll think that through. It depends on how much we like the player. If we think the player has a very good chance of being with us for beyond his rookie contract, we'll definitely consider that and keep that in mind. Sometimes moving back 3 or 4 spots will get you a 5th round pick, and you have to weigh that. Is it worth gathering another? I love draft picks, but I don't know in this year if we start to accumulate a lot of late round picks, if all of these picks will make our team.
Right.
So it's just another thing that we have to keep in mind.
Thanks, Jason.
We'll go over to Ben Volen.
Hey, Jason, thanks for doing this today. I hope you're enjoying your off season. I wanted to ask you more about the pre-draft process. It's such an unusual year. Most of the all-star games were canceled. The season itself was strange. Not allowed to bring prospects in for visits. Medical information may have been more difficult to gather. What have you found has been kind of the most challenging part of this whole process?
Well, I think one of the more challenging parts is going to be the medicals, since it's not done in the way that we've done it in the past, and even last year, because things the pandemic started to really hit after the combine. So having to rely on our medical staff and the process that the NFL put in place to get as much medical information as possible.
And what about just watching film this year of the 2020 season? It was obviously a very truncated season. A lot of guys sat out. uneven schedules. How useful is the film this year compared to previous years?
It's different for sure. Some players played less games than others. Their season was canceled, then decided to go on in certain conferences. You don't know how great of play shape a lot of these players were in. So we had to go back and look at a lot of 2019 film. So if you really wanted to compare apples to apples, that's 2019 was when everybody played in a quote unquote normal year. So, but not to say that we discarded 2020. It's just a little bit different, but what it boils down to really is grading the players on the tape. And I felt very good about last year's draft, our prep, just grading the tape and stacking the board based on how the players played. So we continued that trend this year, and hopefully we have success with the draft again this year.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Go to Kevin O'Donnell.
Hey, Jason. There's not one first-round quarterback that was picked in the first round from 2009 to 2016 that is still with their original team. Given the history of taking quarterbacks in the first round, could teams be successful by just not chasing franchise quarterbacks and kind of building up their team, a solid team, and then kind of picking off a quarterback from another team that's already been developed as a free agent?
Well, yeah, we might have done that last year. Yeah, but it's also very hard when you do want that quarterback and you are in desperate need for a quarterback not to take one if you're picking high. Like you've mentioned, the ones that aren't with their original teams, there's still some are that from previous years that are and pretty darn good players. So you have to feel comfortable. You have to feel like this is the guy, and there's no absolutes in the draft. It's you're rolling the dice with just about every pick. So, it's not. I think it's a little bit of a trend right now, but I don't think it's something that's going to completely stick with every team, because there's going to be everybody's chasing the next Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, obviously everyone's got different philosophies when it goes to that, but are you anticipating 4 quarterbacks going in the top 5 this year?
I've seen all kinds of crazy things happen in the draft. That definitely could happen. You could see 5 in the first 5, depending on trades and things like that. So I definitely see a lot of quarterbacks going in the first half of the draft. That's for sure.
Thank you.
We'll go over to Tom Krasnicki.
Hi, Jason. Congratulations on all your success. Appreciate your time. I want to follow up on something you said a moment ago about one of the challenges of this year's draft, specifically the opt-out players, and what kind of challenge does that present, and how much of a risk is there taking a guy who hasn't played in over a year as opposed to a guy who just played last year and you have recent film on him?
Well, that's something that will probably be studied after this draft. Right now, we have, very small sample size when it comes to that. This has never happened. We've never had a pandemic, and we've never had players, sit out. There have been, a few here and there that have sat out their senior years or junior years and then went into the draft, but because of injury or whatever circumstances. But we'll have to see. I know that we've had a lot of our scouts have been to every school. We've had coaches. We've been to all the workouts that we've deemed necessary, and just to make sure that these guys were in shape or to gauge their where they are in terms of their conditioning and football shape. So it's something that we're going to have to see. We're all playing with the same deck of cards this year, the NFL. So I think we're going to have to see how it plays out.
If you get on the clock and you have a player who played last year as opposed to an opt-out player, is that going to weigh one way or another which guy you're going to take?
No, it's all going to depend on the player. It's all going to depend on the where we had the player graded and how comfortable we all as a staff felt about the player.
Thanks, Jason.
Go over to Steve Isbitz.
Jason, has the Giovanni Bernard signing altered your draft approach in any way at running back?
We're going to take the best player. And like I've said, earlier, it might not be someone that comes in and steps in right away or has a huge role his rookie year. You would like that player to play a role. This goes for any position. So I would say every position is on the table right now. for what we're selecting in the first, second round. So, and the rest of the draft for that matter too.
And as reigning Super Bowl champion GM, do you sense any difference from the prospects when you talk to them on Zoom and from your staff as well? Is there like a little extra juice to them knowing that they're talking to your team?
You do a little bit. One of the questions that we'll ask is just to kind of get a gauge for their football passion is how many players can you name from our team? And in the past, they'd be able to name a few, but it seemed like this year they could name the entire starting lineup, both sides of the ball. So that comes from playing a lot of primetime games and comes from playing in the Super Bowl. So in terms of a little bit of juice, there was a little bit more, players were sitting up a little bit more wide-eyed and a little bit more excited to talk about our team.
Thanks.
All right, we're going to go to Luke Easterling. We have time for a few more after that.
Hey, Jason, obviously you have picked everywhere now in this draft process, right? You've been at number 1. You've now been at number 32 with this draft. I guess I'd just like to know what has been made maybe easier or better about picking on either sides, and what's maybe more challenging about now being on the back end of the first round as opposed to top 1, top 5, where things seem to be a little more clear cut.
Well, yeah, when you go through all the scenarios of who could be there and, picking at 5, there's certainly less scenarios you have to go through at 32, where it seems like there's 8,000 scenarios. So it's a little bit more challenging, but it's a good problem to have when we have draft meetings during the fall in November. And we always throw out, well, if we're picking at, 20 or we're picking at 22, and this year we're saying, well, we want to be picking at 32 every year. You want to be picking at 32, and here we are at 32. So I'm happy we're picking here, and I want to pick here every year, obviously, but it does make it a little bit more challenging in terms of predicting what players would be there, for sure.
All right, we're going to go over to one question with JP Peterson.
Hey, Jason, thanks for doing this. I admit this is kind of a loaded question, but you can have fun with it. Given your situation with Brady possibly being mentor and only Ryan on the roster, what are the pros and cons of drafting a quarterback in this draft, even if it's in the middle rounds?
Well, there's always pros drafting a quarterback for us because of our coaching staff. I have Bruce and Byron and Clyde and Tom Moore. I mean, I couldn't think of a better staff to groom a quarterback. You just want to make sure that you're not picking a quarterback just to pick a quarterback. You want everybody to be on board, and the guy's got to have the right mindset, and it's got to be obviously talented, can throw the ball, but he's got to be someone that we all feel comfortable with above the neck. So there's always positive to drafting a quarterback if all those things align.
We're going to go to Greg Allman and then close with a question from Scott Reynolds.
Hey, Jason, it seemed like last year at the top of the first round, your needs with an offensive tackle lined up really well with last year's draft class to have 4 solid top 15 tackles in that class. It seems like there's a good cluster of edge rushers, of outside linebacker types in the 20 to 50 range, if you will. Does that seem to be the case? Does that seem to line up potentially with where you guys sit at 32?
There is a group there that's interesting. So we have to then do our due diligence in terms of ranking them compared to other positions on the draft board. So like, we're in a great position once again that we don't have to go after what may be perceived as the bigger need. If there's a better player at another position, we can go that route.
Thanks, Jason.
All right, last one will come from Scott Reynolds.
Jason, you got a couple of aging defensive tackles you've re-signed in Ndamukong Suh and Steve McClendon. Will Golston's also 30 in the last year of his contract, but this is not necessarily a great draft in terms of quality and quantity at first blush, first glance at defensive line. Can you speak to that? Is that a fair assessment, or what is your assessment, I guess, of the interior defensive line class this year?
Yeah, it's not as deep as it has been in some years. We've known that for some time now. There still are some that we like, but it went into the process, our thought process of re-signing Nacho, Stevie, and then we do have we're excited about where Jeremiah was last year when he had to play. Khalil made some big strides for us, and feel like he's going to get even better. And then of course we have Vita. So we've got depth for this year. In the future, that may be a position that we're going to have to look at, and that could come out of this year's draft. But we feel good about going into this year with the group that we have.
Thanks, Jason.
All right, that's all for today. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, guys.